All right. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 339 of the Health Detective Podcast. And we have repeat guest Debra Atkinson, and we're going to be talking all about the differences, or the balance, I should say, between pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory exercise. Because just like many of these things in the health space, if you don't do enough of it, it can be bad. If you do too much of it, it can also be bad. And we don't want to create neuroticism around this. We just want to learn, how do we do it for us? And there is a way to do it. So first of all, Debra, welcome back to the show. We're glad to have you.
Well, thanks. It's always good to be here. I really wanted to see the puppy, but yeah.
Okay, right after we're done, I'll show you. She's very cute. And she just got like a shave, so she's about the cutest that she gets. And with that said, I'm just curious because we literally just did a live weekly podcast that we do with one of our staff members, Debra. So if you guys were on for both, shout out to you. Let me know in the chat if you were just on for the Lunch and Learn with Lucy and I. And just in case you weren't, I got a few quick announcements. One, we are in the very beginning of our summer open house event for the entire month of June. So summer open house is basically a time where you can see the inside of the FDN course. We just did a trainee roundtable today. We had 80 people there listening to some of our active trainees talk about their experience in the course so far, what they liked, what they thought could be improved, a very objective conversation. And then about 75 to 80% of the month is going to be more high-level business training. So many of us know plenty about health, or we don't realize how much we know about health, but trust me, you know more than the average person. We just don't know how to make a business out of this so that we can help other people. So we're really focusing on the business side in this summer open house. We've done this for the last 3 years, and this is the most business-oriented one we've ever had. So I do have a QR code for you guys that you can scan if you'd like to join us with that. And then my last quick little annoying announcement / advertisement here. We haven't really done these before, so we're just starting this. I got to shout out the people at North Star Grounding, because I told you guys when we went live with them a few weeks ago that they had these grounding sheets. So you plug it in and it grounds you while you sleep. And I'm willing to try everything. A huge shout out to John Haggerty. He sent me one for free, and I was tracking my scores on my Oura Ring. And I swear on my life, this is the truth. Within 2 nights of using it, I had the highest readiness score that I had had in 2 months. And so we do have a discount with those guys. You can find them at this QR code here. And the code is HDP15 at checkout for 15% off. I will have that in the comments for you guys. Debra, thank you for dealing with my stuff there. I will read your bio and we'll get into it. So,
Okay, but first,
yes.
I want to throw this out. New puppy. If I remember correctly, with a new puppy, you're not sleeping all that well. Wonder if the thing would work for the puppy.
Well, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't speak so literally. When I say puppy, it's just because she's 13 pounds. She's actually 12 years old. I still call her a puppy. And she's as bad as behaved as a new puppy. So that's also accurate. So yes, I'll use my wording a little better next time. All right. So Debra's bio. Hormone balancing fitness expert Debra Atkinson is flipping the script on aging in the second half as founder of Flipping 50, the home of the first and only exclusively made for menopause fitness membership in the world. Her TEDx talk, Why Everything Women in Menopause Learned About Exercise May Be a Lie, disrupts the fitness industry's traditional approach to fitness for everyone. Atkinson hosts the Flipping 50 podcast and She Means Fitness Business podcast, is a 40-year international fitness educator and subject matter expert as well. She's also the creator of the Flipping 50 Menopause Fitness Specialist. So I always love getting into this, and I try to have as much enthusiasm as I can as a 28-year-old male about menopause and the exercise in that. It does matter, though, right? So, Debra, with that said, we'll kind of jump right into this today, because last time we got to hear a lot about your story. I would highly encourage people to just search her name and Health Detective Podcast if you'd like to see or hear her full story from last time. We just did this several months back. I think it might have been at the end of 2023 or beginning of 24. So today we'll jump right into the content. So, I titled this as this difference between pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory exercise. Most people might get a little bit confused by that. So can we kind of break down how could exercise, maybe even the same exercise, end up being pro-inflammatory for one person, maybe even at a different point in their life it was good, and then how could it be anti-inflammatory for others? Let's dive into that.
Yeah, that was a brilliant title, really. And I think approaches it from maybe just a little bit more severity, which is what we need to do. I think right now we need to get attention. And I know your excitement about menopause fitness may not be as high as I'd love it to be. But here's the deal. I mean, you've got a mom, potentially, maybe still grandma is around as well. And here's the deal. How they exercise in midlife will determine how they age, whether they're going to be there for you in 10 and 20 and 30 years. And so everybody somehow is touched by this. And of course, we're talking to coaches who can actually have a huge impact. But I think we only want to be coaches because we feel the impact and influence in our own lives. And we want to be able to extend that ripple effect. So you've got to take into account the status, and everybody here knows, about reading in labs and taking in the stats and the data and the snapshot of right now, what's true for you right now with, say, the level of adrenal stress you have, the level of cortisol stress you've got, or the level of inflammation that you have. That really should dictate the kind of exercise that you're doing. And we all know exercise in some ways is like having a fever to fight an illness. I mean, it's what we're doing is we're kind of creating that internal fire and stirring it up a little bit so that then our immune system kicks in after a workout. But we're a little vulnerable right after a workout. Even an apparently healthy individual here is a little vulnerable. And so we don't want to overdo and underdo the exercise relative to the rest of life and what's going on. So there no longer should be traditional guideline, traditional position statements with a quota of exercise just for everybody. Like all women, all men between 20 and 40 should do X. We have no idea the amount of stressors that someone walking down the street is having. We all know somebody's going through chronic, illnesses, or they're in a tragedy, moment in their life. That's going to impact the kind of exercise that they ideally should be doing. And if it doesn't, it's changing the impact of the exercise they're doing on their body. So it's either throwing them under the bus, pro-inflammatory versus anti-inflammatory. So it's like one person's ideal food could be another person's poison, and lead to leaky gut issues. And similarly, the dose of medication one of us needs, we might both need it, but the amount of it is going to be different. So in that way, that's really how we're framing this up and looking at what do you need right now.
Yeah, I love that. And I found personally that it can shift more rapidly than people would think. I think this was only a discovery since maybe we last talked, or maybe I was just discovering it at the time. My wife and I found out that our previous living space, an apartment, did have black mold in the freaking vents, and I was working from home more than ever before. And so I was inhaling this all day. It did get to me. It absolutely affected me, despite being overall very healthy. I could not just fight that by being my normal healthy self. It doesn't seem. I might have the gene with that. I'm not sure. But regardless, I started to notice, and it was subtle at first, but then I eventually was like, what the heck's going on? My exercise tolerance decreased greatly over the year that we were there. I went from someone, and I'm not recommending this for everyone, this is something I had to work back up to over many years. I went from being able to do a couple of sessions of boxing per week, tons of pickleball, that's my guilty pleasure, and strength training, to I was barely able to do the strength training. I already eliminated the other stuff, but the strength training I wasn't even recovering from. And so it's not so much even that the exercise is necessarily the problem. It's what the heck else is going on at the time. And again, this was a year this happened. Very fast this shifted. And thank God I'm coming on the good end of this now, and it's starting to pick back up.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know specifically for women that might be going through menopause or be postmenopausal, are you finding that more often than not, they have an issue, or that group has an issue with too much exercise or too little? Because I feel like I can make arguments both ways. So I'd love to know from your expertise and experience, which one you're seeing more.
Yes and yes. So, and the word that you've nailed is actually exercise intolerance, simply being a woman going through hormonal changes. No existence of mold or additional immune disorders like the virus that we've all gone through in the last 4 years. that is going to compound it. But simply being a woman whose hormones change could send a woman into exercise intolerance. So experiencing exactly what you did. And we know, it happens with those people who've got heart issues, severe heart issues, but essentially you're experiencing the exact same thing. So it's like you're having an asthmatic attack, for instance, while you're trying to do what has been a typical run or a jog for years. But I would say for flipping 50, generally the biggest problem, the bigger problem, is women exercising too much and yet with not enough intensity. So we have taken, we need to exercise more. We've taken volume and we've misunderstood it. We've misconstrued it. And it's been emphasized by media, by doctors, but even by the fitness industry, that more is better, that being an extra active person must be better. But it's only relative to what's the outcome, what results are you getting, how do you feel, and we're forgetting to ask some of these really very simple questions. And that's where we need to start with somebody. But most women are over exercising but under doing intensity.
I was so glad that you just said that at the end again too, because I'm like, we gotta dive into that because
Yeah.
I have a personal training background. I never share that on here, but I actually got a certification. I'm not the most impressive guy in the world, but I know some stuff. And that is probably one of the things, as deep as we get into nerdy topics on the show, they might be like, well, wait a second, intense is doing it longer, right? Like, isn't that the same thing? So could we dive into the differences there, please?
Yeah, well, and that answer would be right. Yes. So one of the things that I have to be sure that I am telling women is the longer you go, you turn a walk into an intense workout, and you didn't need it. You needed the walk, but you just needed a walk. You needed to take your 13-pound dog probably for the walk. I'm guessing she doesn't go 8 miles, but women think if I'm going to decrease belly fat, or I'm going to get ahead of weight gain that I seem otherwise not to control, we seem to think, if 4 miles is good, 8 would be better. And not true. So that's where we turn on that pro-inflammatory thing. So in terms of intensity, what we wish, that we were telling people and they were understanding is we want to see two different things. We want to see the bottom. We want to see people active all day, doing just daily things that were what everybody did before gyms had to become a thing. At some point, people walked everywhere, people did chores, life was more manual labor. There wasn't a need for gyms at that point because people were doing life. That was the activity. Now everything is automated, sedentary. We dial Instacart. We don't even go to the grocery store. We order it to the door, and then we complain about that. And if our internet speed is 4 seconds to load, we think it's terrible. Like, we're so impatient. And exercise has to happen so we don't somehow get health without that movement in our lives. But intensity ideally is either it gets heavy, we're lifting heavier, fewer repetitions too, muscular fatigue. For someone who can't do heavy because of joint issues, because of conditions, prior injuries, then going to muscular fatigue with a lighter weight where it's still safe for them to do, that's still intense. But getting breathless, if we were talking about cardiovascular activity, that would be a higher intensity level than if you're simply going for a walk and extending the duration. Much more positive, though, if we get this, I'm going to hit that and then I'm going to fully recover. So between strength training and high intensity interval training, we have a much more anti-inflammatory response because we do get the high, but we also get to recover between. We don't have this cumulative hard and hard and hard, and it stays hard. And it's just climbing up and escalating over time. We get to control it.
One of the things you brought up is strength training, and I wanted to talk about just because it's a passion of mine, but I think it's actually becoming more and more popular and very much accepted amongst women, which is beautiful because everyone should be doing it to some degree. You don't have to
Right.
do it to be a bodybuilder. That's not the point at all. You want to be as strong as possible as long as you can, and that's associated with longevity anyway. But intensity with that, I actually this was something that came more in my radar in the last several years of especially when you're a young guy and you look up like your first routine online or something. It's like, all right, go in and do 4 sets of 8 for this, then 5 sets of 5 for this, then 3 sets of 12 for this, and you have a really long workout going on,
Mhm.
and you start to realize. Well, I started to realize that that's not even necessarily going to get you the best outcomes. And I'm only 28. Like sometimes intensity is better than the length of it. Cause I used to go
Mhm.
in, again, this was like 16, for like an hour and a half, 2 hours, thinking if I just do more, I'm going to get better results. But what's
Mhm.
interesting, a lot of the times when you're doing, let's say, 4 sets with 8 repetitions, you're not actually doing it at the level that you should have. Like in reality, you might have had 5, 6, even 7 more reps in the tank for each one, but
Yeah.
you're not doing nothing either. Like you are exercising, your heart rate's going up, you're putting a stress on the body and the joints. And so intensity with strength training, I realized, and it seems to be becoming more popular. I know it was popular at one point and now it seems to be rebounding, is the idea that if I do even 2 sets of 8, but those sets are very controlled and the repetitions are very focused, and maybe I get to 8, but I could have only done 9 or 10 if my life
Mhm.
depended on it. Is that another example of, hey, that's intensity, and you probably actually got more benefit than doing 4 sets of 8 when really you could have done 15 on each?
Yes, and so there's not, when we're looking at midlife women, I mean, the biggest reason to lift, the two biggest reasons is we need to get and or keep the muscle that we've got. Otherwise, we're opening the door to disease and especially immediately to blood sugar issues, insulin resistance, leading to prediabetes and diabetes. Just being a woman with hormonal change, you showed up and you earned yourself that badge, so we've got to counter it. So you're going to hear a lot of memes and issues that here's a sign you're in menopause, you gain weight, you gain belly fat, if you're not doing something about it. So it doesn't have to be a mandatory thing, and we want to be on the positive side of things. So yes, and we're still seeing we do need volume, so we need at least 3 sets, probably is going to trump 2, unless you're doing a middle of the week, it's a recovery workout. So yes, we want to stimulate muscle and maybe we're getting more unilateral work in, but we need volume. So 3 sets or 4 sets. With bone density, what we're seeing is, 5 sets of 5 repetitions seems to do really well. Now, when they take a postmenopausal woman and they do that, this is over 18 months that they get her to that point. She's working that hard, lifting that heavy, and she's probably, that first set is a little bit lighter, and then she's building up. But it's with 2 in reserve. So similar to what you said, you've done 8, but you know maybe at 9 or 10 that's all you had anyway. So the in reserve means you can stop if you're feeling vulnerable. That woman who is like, I don't know if I should lift this heavy, she doesn't have to go all the way, but she needs to be pretty close, and not be able to say I could do 5 more. We don't want that. We actually want you to fatigue, and it's got to be on a joint by joint basis. For women in midlife, they probably had a really good life. They played some sports, they had some kids, they might have had a car accident. Things happen in life. Not every joint is going to be able to lift as heavy, but you don't want to skip the ones that can. We want to get that in.
I love that you talked about reps in reserve. That could be a whole podcast in and of itself, right? Because what one person kind of perceives to be 5 by 5 might be, they might be doing a lot less than they think, right?
Right.
Because they're not actually pushing themselves to have the proper reps. But again, separate podcast. I like that you brought that up. If you guys are anywhere interested in strength training, please look up reps in reserve. There's tons of YouTube videos on it. It's really cool stuff. Anyway, so with that said, I'd love to know how the nutrition side plays into all of this, because I'm kind of thinking from my perspective, I'm like, I'm just going to the extreme. If I did otherwise normal exercise and ate no protein, like literally 0 grams, outside of the fact that I'd have very serious health issues, I mean, of course, it's going to be the exercise that is going to be more inflammatory because I'm not going to be able to heal properly. So, can we
Right.
talk about some of the general nutrition guidelines for women that are trying to get their exercise right? Because I'm kind of wondering how many of these people are just not even eating enough to justify what they're doing physically.
Yes, a lot. I can answer that question technically, like very technically, but that is probably 90% of women. And certainly if they're over 50, right? Because I mean, they've got decades of conditioning. The media has done it, even the fitness industry has done it. Immediate advice from a physician is going to be eat less, exercise more, and now we're getting into this dangerous territory where we've come full circle, and there's a lot of talk right now about creating a caloric deficit if you want to lose weight for those women who are in perimenopause and menopause experiencing weight gain. But the problem is nobody is saying, but wait a minute, don't just arbitrarily create this caloric deficit by eating less than you were. Let's take a look at, first of all, what are you eating? Let's track it. Drive yourself crazy for a week in an app, on paper, reading labels, by Googling. Know what you're taking in without looking at some target. Know what it is. And then I want you to go and Google where it's telling you, based on a woman at your age, what your resting metabolism is, plus your activity level, how many calories do you need a day? And then have them look at the gap, because it's pretty dramatic for most women. Their needs may be 28, 3,200 even, because I've got some extremely active women and they don't realize that it all adds up. And especially a larger size woman, and then she's trying to eat 1,200 calories a day. That caloric deficit she's living in is too vast. So she's putting the brake on her metabolism every day while she thinks she's trying to put her foot on the accelerator. And what happens to your car when you do that, sitting in the garage? It's not a good thing. And so she's struggling, and that is going to be the first thing she's going to need to do, is start eating more in order to turn the metabolism back on and lean into it and trust. And that's training from here up.
Yeah.
That's a long process, and yet it can happen, but you're not actually training them from here down to lose. You're training them from here up to first get themselves into a position where they're not inflammatory, they're not turning on their cortisol levels, and they're not in adrenal insufficiency. We run a membership with over 1,000 women in it, and inevitably we have people reporting on how it's going regularly, but inevitably women are guilty of pushing themselves too hard, most times not hard enough. So they're pushing through to get the workouts done, and then realizing and stating that I had to recover the rest of the week, and I think I'm almost ready to do the workout. So similar to your situation, they're exhausting themselves by doing it because they're not taking in the fuel. So eating prior, eating after, fueling that exercise, really, really important.
Yeah, it's actually really sad to me, and I appreciate you bringing light to it because most of the clients that I've ever worked with are around my age. I've worked with plenty of people double my age, but generally speaking, of course, you're going to attract someone similar to you.
Right.
And when I started this in my early 20s, I found it unbelievable how many girls and women that just seemed otherwise completely mentally healthy and stable, like had this idea and perception that I have to like work out to deserve food or whatever. I'm like, whoa, this is
Yeah.
like, I don't know if it qualifies as an eating disorder, but it's certainly disordered eating.
Yeah.
And then as I did it longer, I'm like, oh my, I can't believe how many of them carry it into 40, 50, 60 years old.
Yeah.
Everything else on paper looks fine, but it's like they've had these unhealthy mindsets around this for many, many years. So again, I appreciate you bringing light to that. Also, I see 22 of you currently on live with us, so thanks for being here. If you have any questions for Deborah, please put them in the chat. I see Carolina already did that, so I will share yours, Carolina.
Perfect.
She asked, can we do intermittent fasting? Can we do endurance training in fasting? So I guess two-part question there.
Two-part question, and probably, Carolina, if it were a two-way street and we were having some back and forth, the question is timing. It's timing on everything. But Can we do intermittent fasting? So when I think intermittent fasting, I think of a continuum that is intermittent fasting, which way over here is doing 24-hour fasts or longer. And so we're talking a really long time. But over here is 3 meals, no snacks, 12 hours between breakfast and dinner. And that I would love to see everybody do. So we're not grazing, we're allowing our body to turn on, to digest better, to start burning fat between meals, get back in tune with our hunger versus our thirst versus fatigue, and we know which is which, and you identify when you truly have hunger, and you are able to say, I can go 3 to 4 hours and have pretty stable energy, which tells us without a lab, at least I have pretty stable blood sugar. I'm okay. And I'm beginning to dip into fat stores. We know at about 4 hours after a meal. So you're able to go and regulate your use of carbs and your use of fats, both. All that's good. And then, yes, I think intermittent fasting for the right person, once all the other habits are included and maybe there's not any benefit being derived, or the our outcome isn't, we're not getting there. Maybe it's gut issues and maybe it's weight loss. But I think what we have to remember is why was intermittent fasting introduced? And it wasn't to reduce calories. It was to change the timing of the food so that we gave our guts a rest. But what I'm seeing the women in midlife make as a mistake is they're combining dieting strategies of the 70s with intermittent fasting. So they are really turning down, again, the volume of food that they can consume, because now they've shortened their window so much that it would be impossible to eat during that window what they need in terms of protein to sustain muscle. So I think intermittent fasting is appropriate. I think it's if you've exhausted other things and you have the lifestyle pieces and you have a good relationship with food. You realize I need food. Food is fuel. I need high quality foods so that when you are in that eating window, they're the highest quality possible. And then you don't do the same thing every day. That's the other problem. I think people get into, I'm doing this 16-8, or I'm doing, just eating 4-hour window every day or one meal a day. Where are all your nutrients getting in? I think is the question. So once in a while, a couple times a month, maybe a longer fast, but I would never do the same thing day in, day out. It's an important distinction to make, that maybe 2 or 3 days a week you're doing 16-8, other days you don't, because otherwise you lose metabolic flexibility. You're doing the opposite, getting the opposite result of what you probably wanted, which is longevity and improvement. So rotating your schedule so it's never the same. If you want a resource, Mindy Peltz, cycles intermittent fasting. And that I think is a good place to start with, looking at, you don't want to do the same thing every day. Yeah, none of us does. And some days you want no fasting, still getting 12 hours overnight. But combining anything that's intense, I would generally say for women, number one, start tracking. So whatever I say, your results should override it, right? So you track your weight, your body composition, your skeletal muscle mass in pounds or kilograms, depending on where you live in the world, not as a percentage. But never, ever, ever, as a human over 40, do we want to lose muscle mass, because it's extremely hard to get it back. We're going to work really hard to get it back. So keep it, number one. And if you're losing it and that's not your goal, losing muscle is usually never the goal, then you want to take a look at, okay, here's the result of my habits. I'm going to, tweak things so I stop doing that. So you've got to get the adequate protein in. And generally, as a female over 40, you want to eat before workouts that are intense or long endurance. And you want to eat after. And if it's endurance, you want to eat during.
Gotcha. Thank you. We had a bunch of questions coming in now, so thank you guys. I
Saw
don't even know
that.
if we're going to be able to get to all of them, but I always say, like, yeah, I mean, we have so many people that watch live, which is wonderful. That like, you guys might as well. We have the guest.
Mhm.
Is this a good one here? Diana asked, "How do we balance intermittent fasting, such as
Mhm.
16/8, with time between meals,
Mhm.
allowing time to digest, but also supporting workouts with food, not working out on full stomach, but also nourishing the workouts?" I mean, you did. Sorry, I guess you kind of just touched on this one to a degree, but I don't know if there's anything else to add to this.
Well, I think she asked a good question of clarification. Like, how do you balance the, say, 16/8 with time between meals? And if you're doing a 16/8, you're probably not going to have as much time between meals in order to get the same caloric requirement in. You're going to, end your fast with a big bolus of protein and, other foodstuffs. And you're going to start your fast with a big bolus of protein. I mean, those things are much more important. And then maybe you've got a smaller meal in between, but you're probably not going to get 3 to 4 hours between, because if you've only got an 8 hour window, it's going to change things. But I would also emphasize again, I wouldn't do that every day. Mix it up. Keep your body guessing. Keep it metabolically flexible.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Carolina had another question saying, "Best advice for osteoporosis? Can we reverse this?" I'll add a disclaimer here. So, we're not doctors, Carolina. We can't say so definitively one way or another. What I can say is I've interviewed people on this exact podcast who have come on and have tests to prove that they have improved their osteoporosis. So I will say it was certainly possible for them. That's just my 2 cents on it. So this is not medical advice. Obviously, we're not claiming that it can be cured, but
Mhm.
I've seen people do this. That is a fact. So I'd love to
Mhm.
know what your opinion is on this, Deborah, especially when you add in the potential exercise factor here, specifically strength training. I think this would be a great thing for something like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, absolutely. And more recent studies since 2016, certainly, they're showing that we're reversing osteoporosis. So we've seen it even with at home workouts. So, case in point, so a client named Diane came in and she found me online, didn't realize I was actually local. We met at a gym to get her started, because what happens when you get that diagnosis? She panicked. What do I do? My future is, my retirement is here. What I thought that was going to look like, is that going to look like that or not? So we started working out. Pandemic strikes, and so I said, okay, well, there's that. So now we don't have a leg press and a chest press and a safe space for you to learn weight training, but we taught her how to do strength training at home. She did. 9 months later, went back for her second density scan and had increased her bone density. So we know it can happen. There's very conscious, eating well as well, decreasing stress, and it just so happened that that may have been helped by the pandemic because she was working from home. It was much more relaxing. She runs a business, but we've got to look at all of the things: the sleep, the nutrition, the exercise, the stress, and make sure it's all in balance. But it can happen, absolutely. There's lots of factors that impact it.
Cool. One more here, and then I'll have one again, because I want to. There's some things I definitely wanted to cover today, but I thought
Yeah.
this was great. It's an astute question. Diana asked again, "How do we maintain healthy circadian rhythms if not eating at regular times?" And just so the audience has some context here, and why I called it an astute question, is because we do know that outside of light exposure, our eating times are actually one of the things that are most intertwined with our circadian rhythm. It's actually one of the most powerful ways to set it or disrupt it. And you can almost use common sense with that. Like, imagine really eating a steak, even if you're a huge meat eater. Imagine eating a steak at 3 a.m., right? Would that really be something that would probably benefit your sleep? Or do you think you'd wake up feeling a little rocky, right? So again, just using some common sense, we can see that in our own lives, but the science is very clear that this matters. So
Yeah.
I'm curious what your tips are for people, because this is probably a huge issue people are experiencing, especially the more extreme the diets get.
For sure. And I do think, though, that most women in midlife, even who may fear, will this change my sleep, or will I go to bed hungry, actually sleep better, find they're sleeping better if they're in their sweet spot for intermittent fasting. And that may be a way that you're looking at is this cycle of intermittent fasting that I'm trying, is it working for me? But for women, I will say this, and maybe less true of males, but women will do better if they begin eating earlier in the day, not coasting till noon. So, because of the relationship with cortisol and a female's hormones, because estrogen declines, cortisol rises, she's more susceptible to negative effects of stress. We can offset that if she's getting some food in early and high protein. So, not to work on a full stomach, all we need to do is break that fast. We need to get something in. So, that doesn't have to be a big meal, then wait, or then work out full. So, you might have coconut cream in a matcha, and you've at least had some calories. That's going to help fuel better than coming in cold and not having anything. Generally, I'd rather see somebody have a little more, half a banana, smear of nut butter, a hearty rice cake, and a smear of nut butter, but something so that we've got a little carbohydrate, a little bit of fat. And that's just okay. Now we're not going on empty. So we're not depleting you further. You've got something in there. But yes, afterward, if you haven't eaten much or you haven't eaten at all, not recommended, the sooner than after that workout that you want that food in, because you're breaking down, because you're in fast. You're breaking down because you're simply a woman in midlife. Hello. And then you're breaking down because you're exercising. It's 3 strikes, you're out. So you've got to get that fuel back in. But the nemesis there, maybe that you're defeating the reason you're exercising and fasting in the first place. So you're just trying to play catch up as opposed to getting ahead. So because ideally fasting will rotate, you're not going to do the same length. So 2 days a week, you're potentially get up, get a good meal in, do your weight training, your hard work, fed, fueled in that state. So you're actually in anabolic place with the muscle. So we're going to build the muscle. Going into it, you're already avoiding low energy availability. So you'll be able to work harder, get better results. And then also on the bookend. So think bookend your tough workouts with fuel. And then the last thing, just to kind of close this up. So if you start eating earlier in the day, later in the day, that's when you want to be fasting. So end that last meal, if you're having your last meal even earlier, like 4 o'clock, so that you can have an extended fast if you want one overnight. But if you go to bed 4 or 5 hours after you've eaten, you're probably going to sleep better, not worse. And circadian rhythm then will be benefiting, not harmed by it.
Yeah, and I might not be making friends with this one here because it's almost like controversial, but it's bro science in a sense. And sorry, I forget I'm talking to middle-aged women. Deborah would definitely know, but if you don't know what bro science is, it's like people in the gym that say just do this and it works, but like there's no scientific validity to it. It's just because it's a bunch of anecdotes. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, but it means that it's not backed up yet, or in the worst case, it's not backed up at all. Like it's actually the opposite, and they're still doing it. But what I was referencing is the eating earlier thing. Listen, intermittent fasting was one of the first habits I adopted with this health stuff. I've probably been doing that for 8 or 9 years at this point.
Yeah.
Very long point in my 10-year health journey. And so, or the majority of my 10-year health journey. And I started off with the thing of, well, it was insane at first because I didn't get the sleep thing down. Like you always learn this in pieces, right, Deborah? So I literally at one point was fasting until 4 p.m. and then would eat my final thing at 12 a.m. Don't ask. I had many things to learn. And I was still 21 at the time, right? Trying to figure this out, like trying to, and it's hilarious too, because I'm eating like organic salmon and like vegetables, but it's like 11 p.m. So yeah, Health Coach Ev, Detective Ev's come a long way, guys. But regardless of my experience with that, which was not particularly favorable, Sachin Panda is a researcher, and he's shown that our circadian rhythms do operate better when we're eating earlier, regardless if you're a male or female. So I kind of have some theories around this at this point, because you'll still hear people with these anecdotal reports that they feel cognitively better, especially the guys. They're always saying, well, I feel like I can get more work done if I just don't eat. there's something to that. I mean, if you're digesting a ton of food, of course, even if you're eating super healthy, it's a taxing thing on the body. It's going to lower your energy. But my biggest argument to that at this point, having experienced this the opposite way, and I've shifted now to eat earlier, I've definitely bulk of my calories early and then stop eating earlier as well. I
Mhm.
think people are eating foods that, even if they're trying to be healthy, are bad for them. And plenty of people in intermittent fasting are actually not eating healthy foods at all. Like, some of them have been indoctrinated to believe that the strategy itself can be an excuse to eat crappy foods. So my argument's almost, well, you don't feel good because you're eating not favorable foods for you anyway, or just terrible foods for anyone in general. So that's kind of the issue. That's why you don't feel good when you eat first thing in the morning. But I would just say give it a chance for at least a month. It changed my sleep. I feel better now than I did the opposite way. So I don't understand it, honestly, because I don't really understand how we would have gotten the bulk of our calories in the morning. Like, from a tribal perspective, that seems like it would have been hard, but that's what the studies show, that's beneficial, right? So
Mhm. Yeah. And I would say, so any of you who are here in your midlife women or working with them, I hear a lot. I'm just not hungry in the morning, so I don't eat. So I fast, and we're calling fasting when actually we wouldn't be eating anyway, which is kind of, that's not exactly what we're after. But when you stop eating sooner, early evening, even late afternoon, moving it back, you will tend to wake up hungrier. I mean, your body has had time to digest. You're not going to bed full. It actually ends up working better. So we get your metabolism working in the morning, and you're going to probably function better. So when you flip it and say, let's see how this goes, ending earlier with your last meal really helps.
all right. And I wanted to get this question as well. Well, actually, I'm sorry. I do have to ask this one first, and then Carolina, I want to get to one more of yours for sure, because these are some great questions.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to specify, Deborah, is like, we're really big on labs at FTN. I'm not saying that's the end all be all, but one thing I can picture becoming a problem for people is, especially these women, they've been trained for decades just to work harder, exercise more, eat less, like you said. I mean, it can be really hard to get out of that, even if they're trying. So, are there any objective ways that you measure how much exercise is appropriate for a person at a given time? People like you and I, perhaps I can speak for myself at least, can almost take it for granted because we've been doing this for so long. We're very in tune with ourselves. So I didn't really need objective data at the time to know that something was wrong, even though I didn't know I was getting exposed to mold. I could see the performance decreasing. Most people, their response is push harder. So what objective measurements do you use or recommend for that?
Well, there's always the weight. So coming back to a smart scale, make sure you're not just looking at a dumb scale, which is weight alone, but we're looking at what's the body composition, the fat percent, and the skeletal muscle in absolute. And some of these smart scales are not all that smart. So they're junior high. They didn't go to grad school yet, but we need them to tell us skeletal muscle mass in pounds or kilograms, because we need that absolute. And then, of course, looking at your strength, and that can be in a, literally, let's test your strength. But you can tell if a woman was picking up 5 pounds in March, and in July she's picking up 8 to do the same exercise. So looking to see that your strength is either increasing or you're maintaining, and you're finding your endurance increases. Resting heart rate, so do we need to take somebody and have them do a VO2 or a bulky treadmill test where we're getting them extremely uncomfortable and have them do that and have them see them in person? Not necessarily, but we can look at resting heart rate. We can look at if they're wearing, digital feedback. We can look at their recovery response, and what kind of readings are they getting. But resting heart rate is very telling as well. If you have somebody do that over a 30-day period, and we're seeing there's a norm here, but then they're exercising a little bit more and they're 5 beats elevated, we know they're either getting sick or they're overtraining. And that's a super simple sign. So there's some really easy, free things and ways to get that. But we definitely want to do that. And then if you're looking at labs, looking at the inflammatory factors, because you're going to see things go up. You're going to see A1C, you're going to see things be off, in part if exercise is and they're overdoing it with cortisol.
Yeah, and guys, not suggesting at all. I don't want to be biased. You don't have to do labs only to be able to figure this stuff out. But I will say, when I get someone's hormone results back, it's very evident to myself and many other FDNs,
Yeah.
kind of a general idea of where you should be starting. And everyone's still going to be a little bit different. People have different genetics. Some could have, hormones that are kind of trash, and they might actually respond to exercise fairly well still. But generally, you can see it pretty clearly in the effects happen quickly when the modifications are made. So that's always a great way to do it too. Yeah,
And just to inject,
sure.
probably one of the most valuable tests and simplest for a woman in midlife who's maybe not buying in, not trusting that, this is the way because she's been conditioned, is a saliva cortisol test to give her the feedback directly. This is where you're at. This is what's happening to you. So, based on the results here, from the habits you've been doing, what do you want to change? And then you've got some consensus to buy in.
Thanks. I'm going to do one more final question here before we shout out where people can find you. Carolina, great question. Great questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of them, but she asked, can we risk endurance training when we're dealing with extreme fatigue or in eating disorders like anorexia to increase muscle mass? I thought this was like a public service announcement at this point. It's so important. Like, should we be doing endurance trainings when we have things like anorexia?
No. So we'll just, no.
Yep.
That'd be no. However, let's define endurance training just to make clear for everybody here. So if we're talking, going for a walk, which is low level, but not necessarily going miles and miles, going for a mile or two, I think we've got people with eating disorders. We do need them.
Oh, no. Let me know in the chat real quick. Sorry, guys. I think Deborah just disappeared, but let me know if it's me or her. Let me know if I'm still on with you guys. I'm very sorry about that. Oh, here she is. Okay, I guess it was her. Hello.
Hey.
Keep running with it. You got it. No worries.
Okay. So we want them to move, but I would say we don't want them to go out and run for 45, 60 minutes necessarily. We'd rather get them strength training. And probably there's a disconnect with body image, in somebody with an eating disorder, but exercise is usually a part of the recovery. So to answer this, to increase muscle mass, we don't want to rely on endurance training to do that. So, they're probably going to be doing more muscle wasting doing that than they are gaining. So strength training would be the way to go, or yoga, something like that with body weight would be a better way to go.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. So, Deborah, I wanted to just take the next few minutes, shout out, what exactly do you offer people now? Because, we have you on as an expert, but there's a lot of people watching still. They might not be clear yet about what you actually do and how you can help. And then I do have you guys are loving my QR codes today, right? I'm so glad I discovered this. It's the coolest thing ever. I do have a QR code for Deborah's program, which I'm sharing right now. And then we will have it in the chat as well in just a second. But yes, please tell us all about it.
So we do two things. We really started originally because nobody was talking about menopause fitness. And I had been training women in midlife my whole career without realizing what a problem this was going to become as baby boomers all went through and said, we're not willing to settle for all of these things that happen to a woman in midlife and weren't getting support. So we're a consumer-based business. We do strength training primarily. We flesh that out with high-intensity interval training and other training methods. But our goal is to keep the cortisol low, keep the estrogen replaced with movement. If somebody chooses HRT, fantastic. Exercise is going to have greater efficacy. If she chooses not to, that's okay. She's still going to get benefits. But we're after getting a woman to exercise correctly in menopause so that she is built to last. She's got longevity, muscle, bone, and brain health. But we've taken what we do, and then we've also turned that into the Flipping 50 Menopause Specialist. So for coaches and or for trainers or nurses, other practitioners who really want to get behind, how do I help other women and build a business while doing it?
Cool. And where specifically can they find that?
So you can find me at flipping50.com. Those are all words spelled out, no spaces. and you'll find the Flipping 50s specialist is /specialist. We happen to be open right now, but put your name on the notifications list if you're interested in the future. We regularly do consumer master classes. There's a blog, a podcast, lots of free content there for people wanting to dig more.
Cool. And Deborah, I know I asked you our signature question last time, and it was relatively recent, so I don't want to repeat that, even though you're like, I don't remember that. But I'll change it up a little bit this time, just for the listener's sake. Just a fun one. If you could only choose one form of exercise for the rest of your time here on Earth, what's the exercises that you would do, or exercise that you would do?
Strength training.
Okay. Number one, easy answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Deborah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.